Hi there, this is the third part in our series on using Scrum with Jira and Confluence. If you missed out on the previous videos, don't worry, I'll put links to those in the description below. So in this video, I'm going to focus on the sprint review and how you can complement that session with Jira and Confluence. Now, before we get into it though, there's often a lot of confusion between the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. So let's begin by clarifying what these two sessions are about and how they are different. Ready? Let's do it. So let's begin with what the sprint review and sprint retrospective is about and also how they're different. So in Scrum, we're all about inspecting and adapting. We inspect what we do, how we do it, and then we adapt it so we can make it better. We can improve it. Now, at the end of a sprint cycle, we've got these two activities to specifically inspect and adapt two things. We want to inspect and adapt the product, but also the process. So the sprint review is about inspecting and adapting the product, or you could think of it more generally as the outcome of a sprint cycle. And we're going to do that with our stakeholders. Now, who are stakeholders? They are anyone who has an interest in what your team is doing. This could be your customers, it could be the sponsor of your project, it could be people from other teams that require something from your team. So these are all stakeholders who are interested in what you're doing and how you're progressing. So we need to inspect and adapt the product with them, and we'll do it at a sprint review. Now, the sprint retrospective, on the other hand, is about inspecting and adapting the process. So this is about looking at how we're doing the work and trying to make it better. Now, this session is not done with stakeholders because we want it to be an open and honest session. We talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, and then adapt it accordingly. So you can see how they are different. Sprint review for inspecting and adapting the product, sprint retrospective for inspecting and adapting the process. So what I'll do next is let's deep dive into the sprint review and how is that done. All right, so the sprint review, like I said, is about inspecting and adapting the product, or more generally, it's about inspecting and adapting the outcome of your team's sprint. Now, we're going to do this with stakeholders so we can collaborate with them on what future adaptations need to be made. Now, why would future adaptations be required? A number of reasons out there, but it can be due to changing customer needs. It can be changes within the organization or maybe new technology that has popped up. It can also be competitors who just come up with better ideas and now we need to adapt what we're going to deliver. So bottom line is there's always many reasons why we may need to adapt what we're doing, but the goal here is to do it with our stakeholders and do it collaboratively. So don't think of your sprint review as being a one-way presentation. That's not what it's about. It is intended to be more like a workshop where we're discussing what's going on, what we've achieved with our stakeholders. They might be telling us about what's going on outside of the organization, or maybe what's going on with the business, what's going on with customers, and then together we are going to adapt what we are producing. Now, this session then gives us two big benefits. The first big benefit is we will align expectations with those stakeholders. They'll see where we're at, what have we delivered, what challenges are we facing, okay? So there'll be no big surprises at the end of the project. And secondly, we're going to receive feedback from our stakeholders. So they will see what's been delivered, what we've achieved, and then we can, again, adapt moving forwards. So with that said, how do we run a sprint review? Well, the first thing we're going to do is invite our stakeholders. Let them know where the session will be, when, how often, what's going to be covered, whether it's perhaps online or in the office. So make them aware, set their expectations, invite them in, and when we run the session, I actually like to have product owners drive it. So that means the product owner will start the session and guide the stakeholders through the agenda and what's going to be done. So they're effectively taking control of it. Now, why do I like that? Well, when a product owner drives the sprint review, it sends a very clear message to your stakeholders who is responsible for firstly driving value, and secondly, who is responsible for the longer term delivery and prioritization. So again, that's your product owner. They're going to be prioritizing the work, they're going to be driving the delivery of value to customers, and you will want your stakeholders to know that, so that when they've got questions or concerns, they will go directly to your product owner rather than disrupting the delivery team. So with that said, sometimes product owners will start the session off by talking about the overarching sprint goal of the last sprint, what outcomes were achieved, and then they will typically invite the developers to demonstrate what was done. This is if developers are comfortable with doing so. It's not necessarily mandatory, but that's typically what will happen. So the product owner will demonstrate things more at a high level, whereas the developers will demonstrate things more at a more detailed level, product backlog item by product backlog item. So this is where we can leverage Jira. So let's go across to Jira and have a look at what we can use within it at the sprint review session. So at the sprint review session, what we can do is leverage the reporting provided by Jira to guide what is discussed. But before we can use the reporting, we first need to complete the sprint. So how do we do that? Well, from the active sprint board here, we simply go up to the complete sprint button. So you can just click on that. And here, what it'll do is it'll say, do you want to shift the unfinished items to a new sprint? And it'll create a new sprint for you and put them in there. Or would you prefer to put them back into the backlog? Now, technically speaking, the items should go back into the backlog, and your product owner decides whether they go into the next sprint or if they're a priority for the next sprint or not, but up to you. Okay, so decide where you want those unfinished items to go, hit the complete button. Now the next thing Jira will do is it will bring you to this sprint report. Now the sprint report shows a number of things. It'll show you a sprint burn down here. I'll talk about that in another video, but what's more important is down here, you'll notice that it'll show you what has been completed, what was left in progress, and what was removed from the sprint. So this can be a great way to guide your sprint review. And from here, typically we would bring this into the session. We'd say, okay, stakeholders, this is what was complete. You might demonstrate each of these items, give a bit of a demo. The items that are in progress, you might want to say why it's still in progress. Was there any impediments, anything that slowed down progress? Reasons why it wasn't finished off. Maybe you were waiting on some information. And also items that were removed. Make sure that you come prepared with reasons why was it removed. And then that will align expectations with stakeholders and give them a level of transparency as to what's going on. So you can see here that the sprint report, nice and simple, can be a great way to guide what is discussed at the sprint review. Now, what's important at your sprint review is not only you showing stakeholders what was done, but you're also obtaining feedback from them. Now, how do you obtain feedback from stakeholders? Where do you store that information? And you can do it any way you like. You could have it in a Word document, in a Google document. My preference, though, is to actually capture it in Confluence. So in Confluence, it can be as easy as just creating a blank page for your sprint review and then just jotting down the feedback in there. Now, a lot of people have asked us for a sprint review template. and what information should be captured in the template. So to help with this, we've created a tool, and I'm going to show you this tool now. You don't necessarily need to use it, but at a minimum, what you can do is you can see what the tool does, how it creates a sprint report, and the type of information that it automatically generates, and you can always do it yourself manually without using it. Okay, so without any further delay, let me show it to you. To begin with, let me just point out that this is an app that you can find on the Atlassian marketplace and does need to be installed. But first, let me show you what it does. All right, so here it is. This is called Sprint Report for Stakeholders. And like I said, what it's going to do is read your sprint information in Jira and then generate a sprint report for you in Confluence. So let me show you how it works. We basically pick the sprint from the top here, and you can see it will give you a preview of what's going to get put into your sprint report. So you can assess it, look at it, make sure it looks correct, and then move forwards with the export. So here you could see what was completed, in progress, not started, added, and removed. So once you're ready to create the report, you simply hit the export report button, hit share now, and you'll notice that it'll provide you with a link to where the report has been created. So you just simply click on that link, it'll take you to Confluence here, and this is what the report looks like before it's been filled in. So the idea is, if you're the Scrum Master or the product owner, you're going to generate this beforehand and you're going to add the details. And then you can use this during the sprint review to run through what occurred during the sprint and the outcomes of it with your stakeholders. It also provides you with the opportunity to capture feedback that you need to remember. So you can see here, I'll just quickly run you through the template. Again, keep this in mind if you want to create your own type of template. You can see here at the top, we've got a sprint summary just to give an idea of what was the focus of the sprint. And remember, some stakeholders, while they might be sitting in your sprint review looking at this, others who couldn't attend, you might share it with them afterwards. So they might be reading this offline. So just keep that in mind. So we add some details there about overall what was happening inside the sprint. Then we go through sprint details. You can see we've got product backlog item by product backlog item. These are the items that are completed, in progress, not started, and removed. We've also got a couple of columns here. So if you want to, you can add some comments there, maybe some relevant information that you want stakeholders to be aware of, and a column here to capture any specific feedback that those stakeholders gave you. Now, below this section, we also like to encourage Agile teams to include impediments and risks. It's a really good idea to make your stakeholders aware of these. So we've got impediments here, anything that's slowing your team down, and risks, current risks that exist, and what actions you and your team are taking to mitigate those risks. Okay, so that's going to give your stakeholders a sense of confidence that you have things under control and you've thought about these potential risks. Now at the bottom here, we finish the report with any other updates and what's next. So that's the basic template that you would go forth and fill out. But let me show you one that's been completed, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So this one here has been completed, and you can see that we keep the summary nice and short, nice and succinct. We put in maybe the dates, we've got our sprint goal, and just a one-liner here, just showing, again, what was the focus of the sprint. Then the sprint detail here, we've added some comments. What can you add to comments? I like to add in links to, let's say, demo pages, because again, some of these stakeholders aren't going to be at your sprint review. So if they're looking at this afterwards, you can give them some links to go and play around with what was created, test it for themselves and give feedback. And then there's a section on the right here, like I said, to add that stakeholder feedback. So, you know, they can give you some positive feedback saying, yep, love what you've done there. And they can also give you particular pointers on what might need to be included. So from here, you can take that and make sure that you maybe add a product backlog item for it so it gets done in a subsequent sprint. Okay, so we provide details in the comments for stakeholders, this section of feedback to capture what our stakeholders say. And let me give you an example of impediments and risks. So common impediments for many teams are usually waiting on other teams or subject matter experts or stakeholders to provide information. So you can see here, awaiting sign off on the infrastructure, awaiting input on business rules. It's, again, important to let stakeholders know that this is what's impeding progress. This is what's slowing us down. They can actually help you escalate those issues or chase those external resources that you might not have any control over. But also other things such as team members being sick or away. That's important to also include. So again, stakeholders get a clear picture as to what occurred inside the sprint and why things didn't get done or not. And then at the bottom here, we've got risks. Not many risks, just security vulnerabilities at the moment. And again, showing our stakeholders that we are proactively doing something about it to mitigate that risk, and we're aware of it. Then at the bottom here, again, other updates. This might be details that are relevant but aren't evident from looking at the sprint plan and what was completed. And then finally, what's good and the way you can end your sprint review is to let stakeholders know what's going to come up next. What's the focus in the subsequent sprint? So then it can show them, okay, what can they look forward to seeing at the next sprint review, and encouraging them to keep on coming. Okay, so that is sprint report for stakeholders. Now, if you're interested in giving this app a go, you can try it out. I'm going to put a link to this on the screen now, and you can also find it in the description below. So go check it out, have a play around with it. Let us know if you've got any feedback or if you would like to see other features, other details added to this report. But at a minimum, I'd suggest give it a go, and it might inspire you and help you decide what you're going to put into your sprint report for stakeholders. Before I wrap up this section on the sprint review and we move on to the sprint retrospective, I wanted to wrap up by letting you know there are a couple of other reports that are built into Jira that can also be very useful. So usually at a sprint review, it can also be helpful to let stakeholders know when the release will actually be completed by. Those sort of more long-term high-level estimates. Now, to communicate that, again, a couple of reports here. You can use what's called the version report in Jira. And what it will do is it will plot how many points have been completed by your team and give you a prediction as to when all the work in the product backlog is going to be done by. And it'll actually give you 3 dates. You can see here we've got a predicted completion date, an optimistic completion date, and a pessimistic completion date. So that can be useful, but remember that it does rely on your estimates being applied to your product backlog items, and those estimates need to be applied in the right way. Okay, that's a story for another video. And by the way, I will create other videos where we go through these reports in more detail. But for this particular video, which is just an overview, I'm just going to keep it nice and succinct. So the version report, you can check that one out. And the other one that's also useful is the release burn down here. So if we look at the release burn down, it gives you a nice visualization of the work that is remaining. Okay, you can see the color coding up here, work remaining, work that was completed per sprint, and any work that was also added during those sprints. So if your product backlog is increasing in size, you will also want to make sure that your stakeholders are aware of that, because it will mean it takes longer. And what it will do is give you a prediction. It'll say, hey, you've got 9 sprints remaining based on your velocity and how many points are in the backlog. Again, I'll create other videos going through these in more detail. And remember, it does rely on those estimates being applied to your product backlog items for these reports to show useful information. But if you have that in place, then again, this can be a great way to show your stakeholders when those releases will be done by. Okay, so that's typically how I'll wrap up a sprint review. Just have the product owner talk about the release and whether we're on track or not. And then at the end of the sprint review, we'll say, thanks stakeholders, you can leave now. Okay, we're going to do a sprint retrospective. So there you have it, an overview of the sprint review and how to complement it with Jira and Confluence. But we aren't done yet, because while we have inspected and adapted the product with stakeholders at a sprint review, we still have to inspect and adapt the process with our Scrum team at the sprint retrospective. And that's what I'll cover in the next video in this series. So don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.